Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. This episode is brought to you by Concepts and Mint Mobile. I'm your host, John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is my co-host, Mr. Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, Mr. John Voorhees.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. I thought, we go a little formal today because we're continuing our Mac OS and iOS and iPadOS, all the great OS's summer preview series today with another interview. And so I thought we would, kick it off a little more formally than the usual show.
Do I need to put on a suit and a tie?
No. I think this is about as formal as we get on App Stories. But
okay.
Yeah. Today, I want to introduce our guest, of course. We have Vidit Bhargava, who is one of the developers of LookUp, which is a dictionary app on iOS and iPadOS, and there's a Mac Catalyst version. And he's joined us because we're going to talk a little bit about design and about Mac Catalyst and all those great things, as well as his app LookUp. Welcome to the show, Vidit.
Hi, John. Thanks a lot for having me.
It's great to talk to you. I wanted to kind of dive right in and talk to you about your background because people may not know where you're from. How did you get started as a developer? I know you were a WWDC student scholar at one point, right?
Yeah, I did get the student scholarship in 2016. And that was a great learning experience as a developer for me. I've been working on LookUp for about, I think, 6 years now. Started off as a designer on the app and then gradually took over the development process as well.
Oh, nice. So what did you go to school for the design, or what's kind of your background from a school standpoint in development?
So that's really interesting because I haven't got like formal education in either of the two, either design or programming. I'm a manufacturing processes and automation engineer by education. And yeah, programming has always been my passion though. So the experience of getting into a college in India is pretty different. So that's another story for another day. But I've learned like programming and design through online courses and through reading different blogs.
Yeah, that's we've met so many developers who have that sort of background where they're largely self-taught, and there's no reason why that can't be the way to do it, because it's certainly it's certainly something someone can pick up. I mean, I did a little bit of that myself back in the day. I'm not doing it now, but that's kind of how I did it too. I'd used the Stanford courses. What kind of things have you used in the past?
Yeah, I've gone through the Stanford course as well, and going to different websites like Hacking with Swift. That's a really great resource for like picking up all sorts of Swift tips and like using them in the apps and different. That's definitely one place, and there are others like Ray Vandelich, and so yeah, these two primarily for programming itself.
Yeah, no, those are really great resources. Let me ask you a little bit about Mac Catalyst, because you've written about the role of design in making Mac Catalyst apps in the past, and one's in particular that fit in with the design language of AppKit apps and the kind of customizations that are necessary to make that happen. And so I wanted to kind of start with that and ask you if you could explain for the listeners what the role is of design in bringing an iPad app to the Mac.
So one thing that's like definitely that was clear to me when I started developing LookUp for macOS was that you can't just bring the iPad interface to macOS. Since the iPad is a touch-friendly operating system, there are a lot of considerations that are meant for the touch. You're not for a touch-friendly operating system. It's not really about the number of tabs that you have to go through to get into something. You can dive deeper through the navigation structure, and you can have like multiple tabs to say go to a collection, and that's still as fast as like if you were to click on a mouse on your Mac OS device and navigate through a sidebar. So that's definitely one of the considerations that I had. Like, it's a completely different medium. In fact, once you look at it, it's more like from direct manipulation, you're going to an indirect manipulation. So the UI for that has to be, in a way, accommodative of that. So you can't really have like tab bars, or you can't really have multiple tabs, or big changing animations. They definitely don't fit into Mac OS. And if you look at like the apps like Finder and Mail, you look at how quick they are and how responsive they are, and there's barely any animation going on throughout the app. So that was one of the things that I realized, like the UI is completely uh, different from what an iPad app's UI is. What we consider as a native iPad experience is definitely not what we'd consider a native Mac OS experience. But at the same time, UI kit brings a lot of familiarity to developing apps, as opposed to say AppKit, and that itself is a great impetus to a great opportunity to use through Catalyst. As I wouldn't otherwise have picked up learning AppKit anytime soon to make macOS apps.
This episode of App Stories and all of our summer OS preview series, both here on App Stories and on MacStories, is brought to you by Concepts, the infinite canvas app that offers endless idea exploration. It's ideal for visual thinkers. Note-taking, mind mapping, storyboard sketching, illustration, graphic design, architecture, product design, and oh, so much more. I mean, you can really use this app in any way you can possibly imagine. I use it myself all the time for mind mapping. It's a great way to explore new ideas, whether that's the layout of a website or ideas for your next big project or plan, or just doodling while you're doing something else. I find doodling a lot of times while I'm working is a fantastic way to help prompt ideas. Sketch, design, and communicate your ideas with liquid ink, editable vector lines, and flexible exports that work with any app. Create great-looking notes and drawings with the designer Copic color palette licensed by 2 Corporation. Movable vector lines allow you to organize and edit your ideas with simple gestures. There's drag and drop images, vector objects, and text straight onto the canvas for quick ideating and sketching. Design tools like grids, snap, shape guides, and scale measurements enable polished professional sketching for architects and designers. An automatic presentation mode lets you connect the device to any display for instant live sharing, too. And the app's PDF feature allows you to mark up, edit, and create and sign documents. It's great if you're editing written work like I do at MacStories, or if you just need to sign a legal document. I've done that as well too, and then send it off by email. The app is used by designers and illustrators at Apple, Disney, HP, Nike, PlayStation, Unity, and other companies globally to sketch, design, and communicate visually. Concepts comes free as a basic sketching app with the ability to unlock features via a subscription or a one-time purchase, whichever you'd like. Visit concepts.app to learn more. Again, to learn more about Concepts, the Infinite Canvas app, go to concepts.app. Our thanks to Concepts for their support of App Stories and our entire summer preview series.
So Vidit, obviously I'm not a huge Mac user by any means. However, the few Catalyst apps that I've tried, LookUp is one of my favorites. I mean, stuff like LookUp and Fiery Feeds, which we often mention on App Stories, really great examples of iPad apps coming to the Mac in a way that they strike a very nice balance, right? Of like somebody like me can say, okay, I'm familiar with this experience because I've used it on the iPad before. However, it also feels at home on the Mac. And I wanted to ask you, do you have a particular example of something that was really challenging in bringing LookUp to the Mac, like a particular feature or design difference, whatever?
I think I probably spent the most amount of time trying to figure out how to bring the tabbed interface of LookUp on the iPad to macOS. Like, that's one of the few design elements that don't really have a macOS counterpart. that's like a direct mapping. So I tried like different ways to implement that navigation. I tried like a tab bar inside the toolbar. That was one of the approaches. I
Mm-hmm.
tried like a semi tab bar and like sidebar approach as well, where I'd have a segmented control inside the sidebar where you could, pick between collections and liked words. And that was one of the most challenging things to get started with on lookup, how to show the collections list, how to show the sidebar, how to make good use of the sidebar. Because when you look at lookup, there are only four tabs primarily. The one is to discover words, and then you have liked words, collections, or to search a word. But when you want to implement that in a sidebar, you'd want to definitely show more of navigation to the left hand side, as opposed to just having four buttons to click on. So that was one of the big challenges to bringing lookup on the Mac, like deciding what sort of navigation structure that I wanted to go with.
Yeah, and now that Apple has kind of come up with a sidebar emphasis both on the iPad and on the Mac for Mac Catalyst apps, do you expect that you'll take Lookup in a different direction because of that? Because it's a little different than what sidebars were available when you first brought the app to the Mac, or are you kind of happy with where things stand with the tab bar?
Definitely, like on the iPad, the introduction of sidebar is definitely something that's refreshing,
Mm-hmm.
and with the number of input methods that are increasing on the iPad, if you look at the latest iPad Pro, there's a trackpad built right inside in the Magic Keyboard, and that's one indication like people are going to use it more like a more for indirect manipulation as well. And for that, a sidebar definitely makes a lot of sense. And given how the sidebar on iPadOS is structured right now, where you can have a sidebar if you're in full screen, and if you go into a slide over or a split screen mode, then it turns into a tab bar for smaller screen sizes. That's definitely exciting as well, because I wouldn't probably want to have that approach for a iPhone, because that sort of slows down the user. But that's absolutely ideal for a large screen device where you have a lot of screen space, and it makes a lot of sense to utilize that through different uh, column interfaces.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Mint Mobile, the folks that can cut your wireless bill to $15 a month with their futuristic approach to wireless. You know what? This system is amazing. It's so easy to get set up. Just go to their site and have them send you a SIM chip, and when it comes in the mail, just pop it into your phone and follow the easy steps on their website to get yourself set up and going. It's incredibly simple. I haven't done a ton of traveling over the summer, but I have gone a few places nearby and all over the Chicago area and into Michigan and a couple other places I've been. The coverage has been excellent. I really like Mint Mobile a whole lot. And what I like the most is the simplicity of being able to do everything on the internet without having to go into a store or call somebody on the phone. If you're still using one of the big wireless providers this year, have you asked yourself what you're paying for? Between the expensive retail stores, inflated prices, and hidden fees, there's ample opportunity to take advantage of paying customers like you. This is where Mint Mobile comes in. Mint Mobile provides the same premium network coverage you're used to, but at a fraction of the cost because everything is online, like I said. Mint Mobile saves on retail locations and overhead, then passes those savings directly to you, making it easy to cut your wireless bill down to just $15 a month. Every plan comes with an unlimited nationwide talk and text plan, and you can stop paying for unlimited data you'll never use. Just choose between plans with 3, 8, or 12 gigabytes of 4G LTE data. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone number along with all your existing contacts. Just ditch your old wireless bill and start saving with Mint Mobile. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, Go to mintmobile.com/appstories. Again, that URL so they know you came from our show is mintmobile.com/appstories. Go there now. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/appstories. Our thanks to Mint Mobile for their support of App Stories.
So, Vidit, have you looked at all into the new Catalyst changes, the new Catalyst features announced at WWDC with the optimized for Mac version of Catalyst?
Yes, definitely. I've been playing around with Catalyst ever since the first beta came around, and I think optimized for macOS seems like the real deal this time, because
Mm.
it renders like the UI kit elements into their macOS counterparts, and that's really exciting. So you can have an interface that looks and behaves like a macOS app without ever having to write a new without ever having to write a line of code. You could say have a button that behaves like a button on iOS, and then on macOS it's like a macOS button, and or perhaps like a toggle switch which turns into a checkbox on macOS. So these things are really exciting because otherwise you'd have to write your own logic. Have to write your own controls for uh, bringing the macOS elements into your Catalyst app, and that's something that like this year seems to have bridge that gap in a way, because you have like macOS like controls, and there are like tons of improvements in the toolbar as well, and in the way how sheets and modal presentations interact. So yeah, once you go optimize for macOS, it's really like a macOS app at that point. You really can't tell the difference
Yeah.
between a well-designed Catalyst app and a AppKit app.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting development with Mac Catalyst this year. It helps with text too, which I think would be something you'd probably be pretty excited about too, right?
Yeah.
Since your app has so much text in it.
Yeah, there's no scaling this time around, so that irons out any of the edge case bugs that would show up due to like 70% scaling from last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Vidit, I want to ask you a little bit about big picture design between the Mac and the iPad this year, because I can't quite decide in my own head, is Mac OS being adapted so that Catalyst apps fit better on the Mac, or is the iPad being made to look more Mac-like? I mean, or is something else entirely going on? I mean, what do you think is happening, kind of big picture design between the iPad and the Mac? Because clearly Apple seems to be bringing these two platforms closer in alignment than ever before.
Yeah, that's definitely my takeaway from the keynote as well. Both the platforms are coming closer than what they were previously. So if we were to look at the iPad pre iOS 14, or maybe even pre iOS 13, it was more like the iPhone operating system that was adapted for a larger screen. But when we look at the number of changes that have come around in the last 1 year, and that are going to come with iOS 14, the gap between the Mac and iPad seems to have reduced far more than what we had like 2 years ago. And that's whether it be through supporting different inputs like the cursor, or be it to support something like a sidebar, or have different ways of keyboard interactions. These things definitely tend to like make it look more like a device that's designed for both direct and indirect manipulation, as opposed to with the Mac OS, it seems a little more of a generational shift, in a sense. Like we had this aqua design with Mac OS 10, which had a very distinctive look to it. But when Apple like changed to Mac OS Big Sur, they definitely had something in mind about converging the two platforms closer together in a way to be either to be more consistent, or perhaps have something that makes both platforms look more familiar to each other, and that sort of shows in like how the widgets are aligned and how the apps look and feel. It's more like it's more consistent as well. And perhaps you can take a look at it and say that maybe the platforms are definitely converging a little more closer than what they were previously.
So Vidit, one of the big features that Apple launched this year and that you've adopted in LookUp as well was the pointer integration. So in iPadOS 13.4, they added support for a native system pointer, and at WWDC there was also this excellent design session. Sort of when Apple went through all the little details, all the motivations behind designing the pointer and how the pointer was designed and all these interactions and these custom effects that we have. What was your approach in bringing pointer support to LookUp?
My approach was pretty simple when it came to pointer interactions, because I just had to look at what the native apps were doing, what Mail was doing, or what Notes app was doing. I had to look at those apps and like try to figure out, okay, so this works best. And one of the things I realized very quickly is that, even though there are pointer effects like the hover effect or the highlight effect, Apple seems to be using them very sparingly. So you'd not have each and every table cell highlight every time you scroll through it, or every time you hover on some element, you'd not have that highlight. But things like buttons or the navigation bar, they definitely have a distinctive look to them, as opposed to say a table view list, or where you have a lot of elements and you need precision, you need speed of scrolling down. Their Apple seems to be holding back on any sort of effects, and that's what I tried to incorporate in the app as well. So whether it be through the navigation buttons, definitely they get default treatment. They say you get a lot of things for free when you have like a standard nav bar or a standard tab bar. So you get a lot of those effects for free. But yeah, perhaps like the most challenging bits of that design process were deciding whether to have something lift up or whether to have it hover slightly on your hover state of the pointer. And that's one of the areas where I like had to look at it and like try to play around with the simulator a little bit to see, okay, so this effect works if your button size is not too large. And if your button size is too large, it becomes difficult to for a lift effect to stay in context with the app. Those were like some of the considerations. I think like Apple's default apps definitely provide a great starting point for that.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And uh, we touched on this a few minutes ago, but also this year in iPadOS 14, like this general idea of design for iPad. And so all these changes in iPadOS that are sort of trying to allow developers like yourself to better take advantage of the iPad's larger screen. And so you have things like sidebars, for example, and this greater emphasis on saying this is not an iPhone inspired design. We want to make sure that our app can take advantage of the iPad's widescreen form factor, but also all these different input methods that you have on iPad that you don't have on the iPhone. So, what is your, what is your approach to this sort of shift happening where Apple is effectively telling developers, look, you gotta take better advantage of the display. You gotta move away from these iPhone-inspired designs, and here's all these tools that you can now use. What's your approach to sort of LookUp on iPad in 2020?
Yeah, lookup in iPad in 2020 is going to be a lot more like lookup for macOS last year.
Mm,
I learned a lot through the macOS design process about what are the best ways to have like a sidebar and be utilize it to the fullest, so that you don't just have like four items in a list, and you know provide an experience that's more attuned for a larger display. as opposed to trying to have a grid formation on trying to create a grid formation out of the iPhone UI. So, like in the previous years, my approach had been okay, so this is we have like a one column layout on the iPhone. We could do a two column layout on the iPad, and or we could do a three column layout on the iPad. So, that approach definitely works in a lot of areas. But given how the operating system itself is moving into these multi-input mechanisms, and you have to you can't assume that somebody would only use a touchscreen, like only use the iPad in a touchscreen mode. You have to like consider the fact that people will want to attach it to their smart keyboards, or they'll want to attach a trackpad along with it, and they'd expect that to work just as quickly as it would be on like a touchscreen only experience. So yeah, the current design is definitely more oriented towards the touchscreen, yes, with support for pointers and keyboard interactions. But this year it definitely seems like the direction that Apple is going in is, you know, the sidebars were great for all sorts of inputs, because you can like quickly navigate through, even if you're on a trackpad, or if you're on your touchscreen mode of the iPad. And one of the key things that I've learned in the design process is, if you're able to show the focus of what's on screen, like whether it be through highlights or whether it be through selection states, even a sidebar system which would seem slightly unintuitive for a touchscreen device, because the navigations are very very different. Even that can look very nice, and it can have a lot more contextual relevance, as opposed to where in the previous years where you have a sidebar, and it would sort of either be that you're like diving deeper into the details of something, whereas right now we have like a flat navigation this time around.
I want to ask you a little bit about the design on the Mac, which is interesting to me because things are, generally speaking, I think, spaced out a little more, especially, when you look at the menu bar and you look at the menuing system, the menu drop downs themselves are larger and the items in them are spaced out further. And that carries over into other elements of the Mac design this year too with Big Sur. And do you think that's telegraphing touch, or do you think that's really just a different sort of design choice that Apple's making there?
I feel some of it is definitely modernizing the UI. We have much larger Macs in 2020 as opposed to
Hmm.
say 2004, 2005, when the Aqua design theme came out. And you know perhaps at that time space was a consideration, and having a point and click device be in that way, there was a lot less white space, and a lot more about optimizing for the screen size. That's definitely one of the design choices that seem to be made, is probably for larger Macs, because like even
Hmm.
if you look at the standard like 15-inch Mac, it's gone up to 16 inches now. And and we have larger like 32-inch displays, uh, and 27-inch iMacs, which we didn't have earlier on. And if you look at the Mac on
Right.
those, if you look at the current operating system on those devices, it seems like a lot of things are much smaller than we'd expect that to be. And yeah, who
Right.
knows, it could also be for touchscreen as well, because we have iPad apps and iPhone apps coming to macOS. That definitely seems like an omen for touchscreen support coming very soon, because I can't imagine using iPhone apps through a cursor and pointer.
Right. Yeah, I keep going back and forth on it myself because on the one hand, I kind of feel like as you said, where our Macs have in general such bigger screens now that why not take advantage of the space? And Apple even got rid of, the smallest MacBook not that long ago. and
Yeah.
the smallest Mac, the 13-inch models are essentially the same size as an iPad Pro. So it does kind of make sense to spread things out a little bit more. But then you also look at things like the stoplight buttons in the corner, and they're kind of pulled in from the edge a little bit, which to me almost feels like, well, that makes it easier to hit them without accidentally tapping outside of a window's bounds and then accidentally, bringing a different window to the forefront. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there, but I I think I'm not convinced that we're going to have touch Macs, but I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. Uh, I wanted to ask you too,
Yeah.
Vidit, is there anything about Mac Catalyst that was announced that you were hoping that was going to be announced that wasn't announced this year?
I was really hoping for the toolbar to get like wider support for things like a search bar, or
Mm,
one of the things about Catalyst last year was uh, you had to use a lot of AppKit elements in the toolbar itself, uh, because of there were things that were missing last year, like
sure.
we didn't have sheets, or we didn't have drop down menus, and they seemed like an obvious and a search bar, and that seems like a lot of things have been brought into the toolbar this time around. But there are a lot of things like some of the basic elements that are still that you'll still have to rely on AppKit bundles for if you want them to be in the toolbar. So it could be that Apple is sort of moving away from that approach and trying to implement a new design system, so they don't think that's a priority for them, or it could just be a matter of implementing it this year as opposed to implementing it next year as opposed to implementing it this year based on their priorities. So I was thinking of like full toolbar support for AppKit, like better, like completely eliminating the need for AppKit bundles. But I suppose that's a multi-year process.
So Vidit, my final question for you today would be: can you share some of your plans for LookUp and perhaps, I don't know, other apps that you have coming up? What are you working on? What are you excited about this year?
So I'm definitely excited about LookUp 7, the next like major release for LookUp. It will have like iOS 14 features, like widgets and app clips, and I definitely plan to support sidebars and like in iPadOS, as well as bringing the new layout to macOS as well. One of the things that I'm planning to do this year is like to converge, uh like last year what happened is with Catalyst and everything, the app sort of like broke into two different halves. We'd have one storyboard for the iPhone and iPad version, and the other storyboard for the macOS version. And like that's not a great approach, and so that's like internally I'm trying to converge the two into sort of say one UI where I could adapt to different idioms like macOS and iPad. So that's on the technical front, to like bring both of them closer together, just like iOS 14 does, iOS 14 and Big Sur do. And then I'm excited about like a few new features for lookup that are apart from what iOS 14 brings uh, to the users. So one of the features that I'm currently working on is the ability to add notes to your definitions. So a lot of users have wanted to customize what they learn through different techniques, like say they want to attach an audio clip to it, or they want to attach like a scribbled note to it. And that's given how popular that feature request has been, that's definitely something that I'm working on, and hopefully we will be able to release in time for like lookup 7 uh, whenever iOS 14 comes out. And then I'm working on like a couple of new projects as well. So one of them is like a basic video player where you can view any file that you have on your iPad or through a remote video or a remote video link, uh, that you can like directly play into iOS standard video player. So that brings all the standard features to your videos, whether it be picture in picture or whether it be being able to play the audio while while your device is locked. Like these things, when we look at our current like iPad app ecosystem, a lot of apps that support local video playback, uh, they have their like fancy uh, like custom video players for that, and a lot of the simple functionality gets lost in that. A lot of the things that iPadOS provides you for free for a video, that sort of gets lost in the fancy custom players. So that's a small project that I'm really excited about because I've been using it for a few days, and it seems like video playback seems to have improved for me on iPad. And finally, I'm also excited to work on a note taking app that simply uses Apple Pencil, and the idea is to be able to quickly take down a note to the Apple Pencil and share it with friends without having the need to sort of organize your handwritten notes into different folders or different systems, like how most of the apps in this space do. When we look at most of the note taking apps, they're more like organized. You put them in folders or you put them in projects. And this one's more like, you tear a sheet of paper and write something down and share it with your friends.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I've used your video player, and I used it during WWDC, and it's really fantastic. So I'm looking forward to you releasing that at some point down the road, because I think you're right. There are so many video players out there that are just too much for most circumstances, and often all you want to do is get up and running really quickly and start watching a video either in picture or as you said, lock your screen and just listen to a conference talk or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Well, Vidit, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I mean, we have been big fans of LookUp since you released it, and it sounds like you're working on some really exciting new features that I think, especially that note taking and doing that kind of thing with alongside the word sounds like a really great feature to me. It's not something I would have thought about myself, but I can see why people have asked you for that, and I think it sounds like a really, really great addition. If people want to learn more about your work and about LookUp, where can they go, Vidit?
So my Twitter account is at ViditB. That's where I post most of my LookUp related tweets, whether it be sharing something that's a work in progress or sharing some of the design decisions behind LookUp.
All right. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as to LookUp itself on the App Store. So go check that out, everybody. I want to thank our two sponsors again, and that's Concepts and Mint Mobile. You can find me and Federico on Twitter and Instagram, and of course at MacStories.net. Federico on Twitter and Instagram is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.